Today's video is a compilation of some of my most popular videos that have gotten close to 1 million views on my channel that other people have found super helpful. And I wanted to put them together in one video to give you all the information you need to prepare for and live your best life in retirement. Enjoy the video. I'll see you in there. Some of the toughest but most important questions I get asked as a fee-only financial advisor with over 20 years of experience is, hey, Azul, at what age should I retire? Is there a perfect age to retire? And unfortunately, the short answer is there's no perfect age to retire for everybody, but there likely is a perfect age for you. So stay tuned and let's talk about how I walk people through that decision and what the right age is for them. So the first thing we talk about is how is their health, right? You can have all the money in the world, you can have all, you can really love your job, but if you're in poor health and you don't have a lot of time, once you're gone, you're gone. So the first question is, how's your health? Can you expect to live with reasonable activity and mental acuity for the next 20 or 30 years? Because if you come from a history of, let's say, dementia that starts kicking in at 70, and you're 55, you have to factor that in. Or, if you're a cancer survivor, you've had cancer in the past, you've beaten it, but you know that there's a chance it's gonna come back, right? So that's job number one, is thinking through what is your health? Okay, the next factor is, how much do you really love your job? And I'll tell you, when I ask that question, 80% of the time I hear, oh, I love my job, right? It just kind of comes out. It's kind of this societally acceptable answer. However, we know that when HR companies survey employees, if they, let's say your name's on the survey, 80% of people are going to say, they're very satisfied or they love their job. But do that same survey anonymously, and it's the exact inverse. Only 20% of people say that they love their jobs. I should say this is for American employees. And that's sad, but that's the reality. So when somebody says, oh, I love my job, we start talking about it. And one of the questions I like to ask, which is a good question for you to think about, is if you won $100 million in the lottery next week, a year from now, would you still be working? And for that, you get a very different answer. I get 90+% of people that say, no, of course I wouldn't be working. And so the question we all have to ponder, and the answer is we have to answer it honestly for ourselves, is what's the difference? If you have enough money to live the life that you want, what's the difference between, let's say the number's $800,000 for you. You have $800,000 and you're still working. What's the difference between that and winning $100 million in the lottery? And of course, the answer is, the difference is it's $99.2 million difference. And that's true, except after taxes, of course, it'd be less. But really think through if the answer to that is, of course, I would not be working a year from now, then think about that. Okay, so that's the second question, is how much do you love your job? The third question is, if you're married or if you have a life partner, what do they think about you continuing to work? What is your spouse's goals? If your spouse is waiting on you to retire so you can do these things that you've always dreamed about, you want to be really careful about continuing to work beyond the point that you're financially independent, right? And then on the opposite side of that coin, there are spouses that are nervous about, what's retirement going to look like for us? I married my spouse for better or worse, but I didn't marry him for lunchtime, right? Is the old joke. So if your spouse wants you to retire, really give some serious thought to working past that point where you no longer need it for the finances. And if you're working past that point because you have some charitable goals that you want to do, or you want to be able to leave your kids more of a legacy, again, I think it's super important that both spouses are on the same page, because again, having done this for 20 years, advise people through this journey. Sometimes what I see happen is the spouse that refused to quit working, let's say they have a health issue, or God forbid they have a stroke or a cancer diagnosis, and they don't have long, or they've lost their mobility. And oftentimes the other spouse is the caretaker. And if you could have retired and you didn't retire, and the spouse wanted you to retire so you can do these trips, you can do these other things that you've dreamed about, you know, there can be some resentment there. And the last thing you want to have is resentment with your spouse, resentment with your life partner, and particularly because oftentimes they're going to play a primary role in your caregiving. And, you know, resent is a horrible way to live the last chapter of your life with your life partner. So just be really, really careful there. Okay, so the fourth item that I want to talk about, and what most people thought a financial advisor would start with, is your finances. Do you have enough money to retire? And looking through that and making sure that you do have enough money. And what does that retirement look like? You know, for some people, $800,000 is enough money to retire very comfortably. For other people, you know, maybe I've had people that say, I need $5 million to retire. And we look at their cash flow needs, and they're right. Based on what retirement looks like for them, maybe they do need $5 million, but it's a trade-off, right? The longer you work in order to be able to get that financial goal, there's always ways to make more money, but there's no way to make more time. And often at our age, once your health is lost, it's very difficult to get it back. So just be careful what those financial goals are. Make sure they're aligned with your values. And then also be careful not to have the goalpost for those financial goals to continue to move. It's super easy to say, you know, my goal is $1 million and then I'll retire. And you get to $1 million and say, well, I want a buffer. And there's nothing wrong with having a buffer. But you get to, let's say you want a $500,000 buffer or $200,000 buffer. And then you get there and it's like, well, I just want to work one more year in that term. Be careful with that term, one more year. Those can be three of the more dangerous words in retirement planning. And it's always easy to put off retiring and work one more year. And often there's some unique opportunities that come later in our career. But remember, if you're 60 years old, you likely have less than 1,000 weeks of healthy, active time remaining. So working one more year or 2 more years, just to give me easy math, is 10% of what is likely going to be your healthiest and your most active years. So you want to be careful. Okay, another consideration is just psychological. Are you ready to retire? Do you know what you would do in retirement? What are you excited about? And if you're not ready to retire yet, I strongly encourage you to put in the reflective work that you need in order to decide, you know, what that looks like for you. And a good book, if you haven't done this exercise yet, there's really 2 books. One is called From Strength to Strength by an author by the name of David Brooks, Brooks. The other book is a book called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. Both of those will put you in the reflective frame of mind that you need to start thinking about what retirement looks like for you and what you want to be doing. And one of the things Die with Zero talks about, which is my next criterion thing to think about, is something that Bill Perkins calls time buckets. There are periods of time in your life where you can do certain things. For instance, I learned to surf when I was 50 years old. And it's something I've always wanted to do since I was a kid. And it's like, you know, if I'm ever going to do this, I need to do it now. And could I learn to surf now that I'm close to 60? Yes, I could. But I suspect it would be harder, right? Because when you fall off a surfboard into a wave, it's tumbling you around, and you better have done your yoga and have plenty of flexibility in place. There's a saying about Begin with the end in mind. And one of the things that can be super helpful for people is to have an idea of what does the average person have in savings when they retire? What does the average 60-year-old have in retirement savings? Where am I now, and what do I have to do to get there? Or how do I compare if you're already there? So let's go for a walk and talk about it. I've got this beautiful mountain stream behind me. You can see a little bit of snow on the ground in early fall here in the ski town in Utah where I'm at. So let's go for a walk. And one of the things to look at, but it's not complete. So stick with me because I'm going to fill in the holes in this as we talk. But one of the places to start is, what do people's 401k balances look like? And so let's go there. There's multiple studies. Today I'm going to use Vanguard's study. And I'm going to share with you different age groups in case you have adult children or other people you want to share this with. But for the 401k balance, the average 401k balance is below 25 years old is $5,200. From 25 to 34, it gets to $30,000. From 35 to 44, that average balance goes just under $80,000. From 45 to 54, that number goes to $143,000. Now, here's where we're at for people getting close to retirement. 55 to 64, the average 401k balance is $208,000. And then 65 and older, the average 401k balance is just under $250,000, $232,000. So that's getting to be a nice balance on the 401k. And, but this has a couple of holes in it. I'm gonna fill in these holes. Some of the important holes is, your 401k is not all of your retirement savings, right? For many of us, our home is our most valuable asset. Many people have multiple 401ks or multiple IRAs. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we, as I stand on a bridge here, how do we bridge that gap? And the Federal Reserve just released the newest survey of consumer finance report that talks about the overall picture, the net worth of folks in the United States. And they update this report every 3 years. So until a couple weeks ago, the most up-to-date information was as of 2019, which was just before the pandemic, right? And as we all know, the pandemic changed things for a lot of us. And so this report, it's kind of like Christmas for me, as you saw the snow in the background. And actually, I've got some Christmas lights behind me here. I don't know if you can see those, but Christmas lights are up already here. But it's Christmas for me because I can see where the United States is at now. So if you look at the Survey Consumer Finance Report, which is put out by the government, the Federal Reserve puts this out. And this is for the calendar year 2022. The results were just released in fall of 2023, but the data is from 2022. In here, I want to back up. This data gives me both averages and median. And I want to share why median is so important. Imagine you're in a family and you have 3 siblings. And just for easy math for me, you and each of your siblings all make $50,000 a year. Well, the average is $50,000. And the median is, half of the kids are making more, half of the kids are making less. Well, the median's the same. In fact, to illustrate this, let's say one of your siblings makes $40,000, another sibling makes $50,000, or let's say $40,000, you make $50,000, and another sibling makes $60,000. Well, the median is half. So you're the half, right at the halfway point, right? $50,000. So that's the average. But here's what happens, right? So you've got 4 siblings, but I've only talked about 3 children. So let's go back to that $50,000 each, $50,000 each. But now your sister, who makes a lot of money, shows up, and your sister makes $850,000. Well, the median is still $50,000, right? Half make more, half make less. But the average jumps up to $250,000. The total is $1 million divided by 4, $250,000. So the difference between the median and the average is really important. And the Federal Reserve gives us this data by median. So I really like this. So for people under 35 years old, the median is $40,000. Median net worth for people under 35. 35 to 44, that number jumps to $135,000. 45 to 54, just under $250,000. Now we're getting into the sweet spot, what we're all here for. 55 to 64, the median is $364,000. And 65 to 74, it goes up a little bit more. The median there is $410,000. And then above 75, people start spending their money and it drops down. So 55 to 64, $364,000, and 65 to 74, $410,000. So you can, and I want to show you how much the averages can be skewed. This same data, I won't go through it all, but 55 to 64, remember the median is 364,000, but the average is 1.5 million. And 65 to 74, it's $410,000, but the average is $1.8 million. So you can see that can be a big difference, right? And so I want you to be aware of this difference because it's really, really important. So, so what do you do? Well, how is this information helpful? I think it helps several ways. One, it's just good to benchmark, right? To see where you're at. When I was 22 years old, I had my first financial plan done. And I really suggest that you work with a fee-only financial advisor. And one of the most helpful things for me is that financial planner. His name's David Jenks from Memphis, Tennessee. He was fairly old when he worked with me 30 plus years ago. So he's probably no longer with us, but I do want to give a shout out to him because that study guided me for a good decade until I had it updated. And I like to update my plan every couple of years. I think you should do that as well so that you know where you're at on plan. So if you know where the end point is, and unfortunately, the average person, the median person, needs to be saving more than that. It's not enough to have, I don't think. Well, it can be. There's different YouTube channels where folks talk about retiring on under $500,000. But I think most of us would, if we can, if it's possible, like to save more than $500,000. One of the most important questions I get as a financial advisor is, hey, Azul, do I have enough money to retire? And it's a super important question, and there's a lot involved in the answer to that. But there are some rules of thumb that you can use not to determine if you have enough money, but to determine if you're getting close. And once you know you're getting close, then you can dive deeper and do more work on it. And I think one of the thought leaders in this area is Fidelity. Most of us know Fidelity as a custodian, a place that maybe our 401k is kept. But Fidelity also has done a lot of work on this question. Do I have enough money to retire? So let's talk about one of Fidelity's rules, which is the rule of 45%. And before I jump into the rule of 45%, there's a couple foundational principles that Fidelity would say you need to understand first. So let's start with those. Okay, so the first one is they do an exercise where they say, this is the multiple of your income that you should have as you're getting close to retirement. So and I like this rule because there's a number in there for all of us, right? No matter what your income is, no matter what your age is, Fidelity has a guideline to say, this is how to know if you're on track. So let's start with how to know if you're on track. So they would say 30-year-olds and younger, 30 and younger should have 1 times their salary, their current salary saved up. So if you're 20 and you're making $40,000 a year, they would say you should have $40,000 saved up. If you're 30 and you're making $75,000 a year, they would say you should have $75,000. So again, there's something there for all of us. If you're 35, they would say that you should have 2 times your current income. If you're 40, they would say you should have 3 times. If you're 45, 4 times. If you're 50, you should have 6 times. 55, and this is getting into my audience range, 7 times your current income. 60 would be 8 times your current income. And at 67, you should have 10 times your current income. And many of my viewers have heard of the rule of 4% as far as how much money that you need to retire. So if you look at a 67-year-old at 10 times your current income, Fidelity would tweak the 4% rule. They would say a 67-year-old can take out 4.5% of their income. So if you look at a 67-year-old that's making $100,000, just for easy math, Fidelity would say that 67-year-old should have 10 times their current wage, again, $100,000. So 10 times that's $1 million, and their 4.5% withdrawal rate would give you $45,000. So guess where the rule of 45% comes from, right? It's the same thing, it's 45%. So they say you should be able to replace 45% of your income. So they would say somebody making $100,000 a year, if you have $1 million, you're getting in the ballpark. So why are you just getting in the ballpark though? Why don't you know if you have enough money to retire? Well, there's a lot of factors, right? It's not just based on your income. For most of us, here, you're hearing the bell tower behind me here, this beautiful medieval bell tower behind me. But retirement is based not on what your income was before retirement, but retirement is based on what your expenses are in retirement. So you could have 2 people that are making $100,000 a year, and one couple is not spending much money at all, and the other couple is not saving any money at all. So one couple's spending it all, the other couple's not. So that's one factor, right? Retirement is based on your expenses, not your income. That's one problem with the rule of 45%. Another problem with the rule of 45% is it depends on what type of accounts in this example, this $1 million is in. If it's in a regular 401k, well, every dollar coming out is going to be taxed. If it's in a Roth 401k, a Roth IRA, or in your savings account at a bank, you've already paid tax on that. So you can take money out tax-free. Now, none of this is financial advice. It's certainly not tax advice. You should speak with an accountant or a fee-only financial advisor. But you can see how it matters more, not just saying it's 45% of your income, but you can see the other factors. But I do think that Fidelity's rule of 45% is helpful. Now, let's talk about where most Americans are in this. You know, this is almost like Christmas time for me as a financial advisor, because every 3 years, the Federal Reserve releases their survey of consumer finance. And as I record this, just recently, they released the 2022 data. So up until now, the most recent data was from 2019. So in this survey of consumer finance, they show what the median net worth is of Americans by age. And you can see where we've got a ways to go. And actually, surprisingly, since 2019, which obviously was before the pandemic, till now, there's been a big improvement. And, you know, the government was putting out a lot of stimulus money, interest rates were low, and real estate values went up dramatically from 2019 to 2022. So actually, the average American, the median American family is doing quite a bit better. The median 35-year-old in 2019 was worth just $16,000, their net worth. That's now $39,000. The median 55 to 64-year-old was worth just under $250,000, and their net worth increased by over $100,000. And 65-year-olds, 65 to 74-year-olds went from just a little over 300,000 to a little over 400,000. So we're doing quite a bit better, but you can see that rule of 4%, that rule of 45%, we've really got a ways to go. But again, Fidelity's rule of 45%, they would say replace 45% of your income. Earlier, we talked about the multiples of your income that Fidelity says that you should have. Essentially, you're shooting for that 10 times your income. My caution, my suggestion is you don't look at the income, but you look at expenses. How much are you spending? How much do you plan to spend in retirement? And go from there. But the rule of 45% is really just another way of talking about the rule of 4%. Again, Fidelity uses 4.5%. But if you're making $100,000 a year, then Fidelity would say you should have 10x that, which would be $1 million. They would say you can take out 4.5% a year, so it gets to $45,000. And you can see where the rule of 45% comes from. So what net worth does it take in order to be considered wealthy in the United States? You know, we're super fortunate because there's 2 studies that directly address this question for us. Let's jump into the first study. And it's done by Charles Schwab every year, and they call it their Modern Wealth Survey. And they simply ask 1,000 households, what net worth does somebody need in order to be considered wealthy? But then interestingly, they follow up and say, do you personally feel wealthy? And if so, what's the net worth of your household? Now, I want to define a couple terms here. What is household? Household is if there's one person living in a house, that's the household income, the household net worth. But if there's 2 adults living in the house, it's the combined net worth of both adults. So it's household income, household net worth, not individual. And then secondly, what is net worth? Net worth is simply the value of your assets minus the value of your liabilities. So for most of us, if we own a home, it's the value of our home, it's the value of our car, it's the value of all of our retirement accounts, the money in our bank account, etc., minus the value of our liabilities, which again, if you own a home, for most of us, that's going to be you subtract out your mortgage, subtract out your car payment if you have one, any credit card debt, any other liabilities that you have. So net worth is simply your assets minus your liabilities. So what did Schwab find? They found that the average home felt that you needed to have a $2.2 million net worth in order to be considered wealthy. But the second part of that question, do you personally feel wealthy? Almost half, 48%, answered yes to that question. And to me, that's very encouraging, particularly given that the average net worth for the people that answered yes was $560,000. So a far cry from the $2.2 million that they would say that people need to have to be considered wealthy. So to me, that's a sign of us being grateful. I think we as a society are grateful for the position we're in. You know, it's easy to covet. It's always nice to say, well, gee, I'd like to be like that person. But, you know, that's a path to unhappiness. And most of my viewers are older. And so we've learned that lesson. So I think that's a good thing that shows up. It's also consistent with a study that the Federal Reserve does. That's called their SHED study. And the SHED study stands for their Survey of Household Economic Indecision Making. And you can see in that study, over the last decade, we tend to feel more comfortable in our financial security. Almost 3/4 of us report feeling comfortable with our financial security. Now that's down from 2021. It almost reached 80%, which is wonderful. And now it's 73% as of 2022, the latest SHED data that we have. And I think that just reflects the fact that it's getting harder, right? Expenses are higher. Wages haven't kept up with inflation. So it's definitely getting harder. But I do think it's great that, you know, almost 3/4 of us feel that we're financially comfortable. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Having traveled to many countries, I can tell you that's not consistent throughout the world. I mean, there are regions, Europe, the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, but much of the world does not feel financially comfortable. In fact, much of the world doesn't have a retirement plan. Their retirement plan is their kids, right? And so we're fortunate that we can be in a position where we're saving up money, hopefully to be financially independent of our kids as we get older. And that's a big part of my channel. now, right, is helping people reach that. But then also once you get there, helping people cross that bridge from working into retirement. Because as I've said before, if you're 60 years old, unfortunately, most of us are going to have less than 1,000 weeks of healthy active time. Okay. But I'm digressing. Let's jump in. I want to talk about the second report, which is done by the Federal Reserve, and it's called the Survey of Consumer Finance, where they actually look at the actual net worth for people in retirement. And here I want to share, they look at the age group. So I'm going to break it down by age group, and they look at average net worth. And then they also look at median net worth. And I want to explain why this is so important because it's critical. What's the difference between average and median? Average is really skewed by a couple high earners, a couple people with big savings. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're in a family with 5 siblings and you're the middle kid, you're number 3. And you and 3 of your siblings each make $50,000 a year, right? So the average is $50,000, but the median, half above, half below, is also $50,000. Now your brother named Jeff may or may not have the last name Bezos, comes in and he's worth a lot of money, but just for the sake of argument, let's say he's worth $800,000. Now your median, half above, half below, you're the middle child, right? You and your three of your siblings make $50,000. So the median hasn't changed. But because your brother Jeff's here, now all of a sudden the average has jumped up to $200,000 each. Jeff makes $800,000. You and your 3 siblings make $50,000. Totals to $1 million divided by 5, $200,000. So it's a big difference. So I'm going to talk on this video about the median. I'll also put in the video so you can see in the table what the average is. Okay, let's jump in. For ages 20 to 24, the median net worth is $10,800. For 25 to 29, it's a little over $30,000. For 30 to 34, it's a little under $90,000. For 35 to 39, it jumps quite a bit, $141,200. For 40 to 44, it's $134,730. For 45 to 49, it's $212,800. For 50 to 54, it's $272,800. For 50 to 59, it's $320,700. For 60 to 64, it's $394,000, just a little under over $394,000. For 65 to 69, it's a little under $400,000 median net worth, $394,300. 70 to 74, it's $433,100. And then for 75 to 80, the median net worth is $316,000. Now, I want to say a couple things. A lot of folks say, I don't think I have enough money to retire. And, one of the things this shows is that end up 75 to 80 and the median net worth is over $300,000. So I think my industry has maybe scared people into thinking that they don't have enough money to retire. And you definitely want to know for sure if you have enough money to retire. But one of the takeaways from this survey is you're probably closer to being able to retire than what you think. And I encourage you to work with a fee-only financial advisor to find out how close, whether you can make that transition and retire sooner than what you think. Okay, but now I want to go into what does it take to actually be wealthy in the United States. First, I want to go through the median net worth by age, and we just went through that survey, so I'm showing that study up here. It's done by broader groups. Under 35, it's just under $40,000, the median net worth. 35 to 44 is $135,000. Again, this is median, and it's for households. So if you and your spouse, you and your partner live in the same household, it would be considered the two of you. But if you're single, it would be considered your net worth. Okay. And then 45 to 54 is a little under $250,000. 55 to 64 is $364,000. 65 to 74 is $410,000. And 75 plus is $335,000. So $325,000. But now let's look at what does it take to be in the top quartile and then the top 10%. So let's look at the top quartile quartile, so you're in the 75th percentile. You're above 75% of the people. And again, this is median net worth by household. And less than 35 years old is a little over 150,000. 35 to 44, it's a little over 400,000. 45 to 54, it's a little over 800,000. 55 to 64 is a little over $1.1 million. 65 to 74 goes up just a little bit, closer to $1.2 million. And then 75 plus is just a little less than $1 million, $975,000. So that's to be in the upper quartile. And I think it's fair to say, yeah, you're in the upper quartile, you're wealthy. So this is what the numbers would show you actually need to have to be in the upper quartile. And you can see it's less than that Schwab report that I talked about earlier, where people said you needed to have $2.2 million. And there, I think they were really thinking more about the top 10%. And that's what this chart's about. For the top 10%, again, household net worth is just all of your assets minus your liabilities. This is more consistent with the Schwab number. So this is actual net worth. So under 35, if you've got a little over $370,000 of net worth, you're in the top 10%. I should mention these are all numbers for the United States. It's done by the U.S. Federal Reserve and the Survey of Consumer Finance. 35 to 44, it's a little over $1 million, $1,050,000. 45 to 54 is just under $2 million, $1.974 million. You can see pretty close to that $2.2 million that the Schwab survey said. 55 to 64, to be in the top 10%, you need to have a net worth of almost $3 million, $2.96 million. 65 to 74 is just a smidge under $3 million. It does go up from their younger cohorts, 55 to 64. $2.997 million. And then people start spending their money. And so that median for people 75 and older is just a smidge under $2.7 million, $2.699 million. Do you feel like you're ready to retire, but you're not quite sure that you have enough money? You know, it's a real common situation. So this video hopefully is going to be really valuable because I'm going to use a free online tool that's available to the public to analyze a situation where somebody's 55 years old with $500,000 and answer the question, can this person retire? And your situation is probably different, but you can use this video to learn the tool and to tweak things for yourself. This is not an affiliation. This is not a sponsorship. I just think it's a pretty good tool. It's nowhere near as robust as what financial advisors use professionally. But you know what? It's pretty good. So let's jump in. What we've got is we've got a 55-year-old, $500,000 in retirement savings, and we're going to start off analyzing $50,000 in expenses. Why? Because that's a very common number that people say that they'd like to be able to live off of. And, you know, you're not living like a king on $50,000 a year. But a lot of people can have a happy retirement with it. So that ends up being just a little less than $4,200 a month. I'm also going to assume that this person takes Social Security at their full retirement age. And right now, a very common number for Social Security, it's not the average, but it's $2,800. I hear a lot of people talking, they're in the range of $2,500 a month to $3,000 a month, particularly with the recent adjustments. And so we're going to inflate that by inflation. I'm assuming 3%, which is pretty close to the historical average over the last 100 years. So that $2,800 today for a 55-year-old, in theory, is going to inflate to $4,000 12 years from now. Okay, so here's the results of that analysis. And this is using a Monte Carlo simulation. And unfortunately, that you can see that person runs out of money. In the worst case, they run out of money when they're 63. Ouch. And you see that dark line? That dark line is the median. It's half of the situations do better, half of the situations do less. And you can see there, the median, half of the time, people run out of money at 65. So that's not the answer. If you're 55 with $500,000, do not take out $50,000 a year because it could be pretty dangerous. Does that mean you can't retire? Absolutely not. So let's look at some different scenarios, right? Basically, I could tweak what the performance of the portfolio is. I'm assuming the portfolio delivers 6%, but I don't want to tweak that, right? Because that's a riskier, more volatile portfolio. So really, I could tweak inflation, assume that inflation's less, but we don't control that. So I don't want to tweak that either. So the thing that we do control is how much money that we spend every year, how much money we spend every month. So let's do that. Okay. So this is again going to be a 55-year-old. I'm going to assume that they die at 90, $500,000 portfolio, 60-40 portfolio. The equities are going to earn 8%. Debt, the fixed income is going to earn 4%. And expenses of $2,500 a month instead of a little under $4,200 a month, which was the case where you run out of money. And so we filled out the online, the personal side. We filled out the portfolio side. Now under expenses, we talked about $2,500. We also have to look at taxes. Now, I'm assuming that half of this $250,000 is in a tax-deferred account, like a regular 401k or a regular IRA. So only 50% of it is going to be subject to ordinary income tax on the way out. I'm also assuming a 10% effective tax rate. And why is that so low? Well, take a look at this tax bracket chart for 2024. It shows you that the standard deduction in 2024 is $14,600 for a single. It's $29,200 for somebody married filing jointly. If you're over 65 years old, so when this person's over 65 years old, the standard deduction increases by $3,000 for a married couple. So really, they're going to be in a low tax bracket because basically you take your adjusted gross income and then you subtract your standard deduction. So in this case, if this person's married, they get to subtract $29,200. And then they're only in the 10% tax bracket for the next $11,600. So you can see they're in a very low tax bracket. The 12% tax bracket for a single is $47,150. And for a married couple, it's $94,300. Okay, the next section of this free online tool looks at the portfolio. Again, I mentioned that it's going to be 60% in stocks. I'm assuming that the stocks are going to get the historical average of 8%, and the bonds are going to get 4%, which is a little conservative, I know. Right now, interest rates are high, so I want to be conservative. And so with that portfolio, you would return a little over 6%, 6.4%. But there are costs associated with the tools that you use to invest, the mutual funds, the exchange-traded funds. So I'm just leaving that at 6% for the overall portfolio. Okay, and then here are the results. Now with $2,500, the good news is the median, which is that dark line. With the median, you never run out of money. And the worst case is you run out of money when you're 80 years old. Now, for some people, that's okay. And for other people, they'd say, you know what, that's not okay. So let's run a couple more scenarios. I'm not going to go through each page of how to use this free online tool. But I want to run two more scenarios for you. The first scenario is we're actually going to spend more money just so you can see what happens. Some people might look at that median and say, hey, Azul, I'd rather spend a little bit more money. So let's look at that first. So instead of spending $2,500 a month, they're going to spend $3,000 a month. And here's the results. Again, the dark line is the median. Half of the cases do better. Half of the cases do worse. The median is that person runs out of money at 78. Now, few people are going to say, I feel comfortable doing that, right? And the worst case is you run out of money at 69. Some people might say they're okay with this, but most of us would not. Okay, so let's run another scenario. So instead of $2,500, let's spend $2,000. And you can see the results here. First off, you never run out of money, which is good news, right? And you can see the median, which is that dark line. You end up dying with $1.5 million. And the worst case is you end up dying with $500,000. And those are inflated dollars. So they're not like what $500,000 is in today's dollars. But you can see you don't run out of money. Now, each of us has our own risk tolerance, but you can use this tool to figure out your specific situation. So in summary here,
It's somewhere between $2,000, and this is really important. I'm going to share the online tool. It's somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500 a month that this person can spend. And it probably, frankly, doesn't make sense if you've got a lot of debt in your life, if you still have a mortgage, if you have credit card debt, if you have car loans, that's not a lot of money, $2,000 to $2,500 a month, right?
One of the questions that I wish people ask me more often is, hey, Azul, how much am I likely going to be spending in retirement? As a fee-only financial advisor for over 20 years, I probably get asked over 100 times a year, how much money do I need to save for retirement? But I only get asked a handful of times, how should I think about my expenses? And obviously the two are linked and have a big impact on one another. And if you end up estimating that you're going to be spending way more than you likely are, you know what that means? You're going to spend years longer working to save up money that you're not going to need. I don't want that to happen to you. And conversely, if you don't estimate enough, you may retire and unwittingly put yourself at risk because you didn't budget enough. So it's a really important question. And in today's video, we're going to talk about it. Let's go for a walk. I think one of the reasons that people don't ask this question more often is that there's a very common rule of thumb that says you're going to spend 80% in retirement compared to what you spent when you were working. But the question is that a good rule of thumb? And fortunately, we don't have to guess as to whether it's a good rule of thumb, because the Bureau of Labor Statistics every year puts out a consumer expenditure study. And 2022's data just came out in October of 23, shortly before this video. So we've got recent data and we can look at it. And fortunately, the Bureau of Labor Statistics breaks it out by age group. So we can see what happens as people age. And they're in different age groups. And what are they spending for housing and transportation and food? And overall, what's their total budgets? Okay, so I'm going to put a link in the study where you can see the Bureau of Labor Statistics report for yourself. And it's crazy. They have, how much people spend on beef and pork and chicken and eggs and just about everything you can imagine, gasoline. So it's a really, really informative report. Okay, but let's jump into the expenses. So overall, 45 to 54-year-olds in America are spending $91,074 a year. That seems high to me, but that's what the data shows. And then 55 to 64 years old, it's $78,079 a year. I should say these are per household. So there's somebody in that household that's 45 to 54. There's somebody in the household that's 55 to 64. And then 65 plus, it goes down to $57,818. So now let's do the math, right? So it peaked out 45 to 54. People were spending just over $90,000. So when you're 55 to 64, and some of those people are retired, that drops down to the $78,000. So that's 85% of the $91,000. And how does it compare for the 65 pluses, where a lot of people are starting to retire at that age? So the almost 58,000 to 57,818 is 63.5% of what a 45 to 54-year-old is spending. So that's from the peak. But what does it look like? A lot of people are going to work till they're 65. In the U.S., the average man works to 65. Now that's gone up, unfortunately, through the years, and that's because it's getting harder and harder to save money. Life is getting more expensive. The average woman now retires at 62. That used to be about 59. So both of those are creeping up. So what is the percent that 65-year-olds are spending of the 55 to 64-year-olds? Remember, again, the numbers are $57,800 for a 65-year-old per year. And for a 55 to 64-year-old, that's $78,079. And so that is 74% that the 65-year-old is spending compared to the 55 to 64. So for a 65-year-old, it's 63.5% versus peak, which happens to people 45 to 54. And it's 74.1% of what it was when compared to the age group previously. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, I want to point something out. These are household numbers. These are not individual numbers, which is why they probably seem high. Now, if you happen to, if the survey's done and you happen to live in your home by yourself, then that is an individual, but it's households. And on average, the average household has over 2 people in it. And many of these households have 2 people working. So that's why these numbers seem high. Okay, let's keep going. And where I think this is relevant for us is what can you do to budget your expenses so that you can better project what your budget's going to be? And I'm going to get to that in a second, but I want to give you some more data before I go there. And just on some big expenses, right? Our cost of housing, transportation, and importantly, healthcare. Let me start with healthcare, because many of us are going to qualify for Medicare when we turn 65. But does that really mean that our overall healthcare expenditures are going to go down? You would think they would, but you know what? That's not what the study shows. So 45 to 54-year-olds are spending $6,100 a year for the household. 55 to 64 are spending $6,699. 65 to 74 is spending $7,422. And 75 plus is spending $7,708 a year. So what we see is what we're going to have to spend in healthcare, unfortunately, doesn't go down, even with Medicare, right? The Medicare doesn't cover everything, and there are some co-pays and other expenses. In fact, Fidelity would say that the average 65-year-old couple is looking at over $300,000 in medical expenses after the age of 65, above and beyond what Medicare covers. So that's a big thing to include in your budget, is what healthcare is going to cost. And don't assume it's going to be very, very low. You have to make up your own mind. I should say, none of this is financial advice. I just want to put these things like the availability of this data on your radar screen. I do encourage you to work with a fee-only financial advisor or an accountant that can know your specific situation and give you advice on your specific situation. Okay, so we talked about healthcare. What about housing? You know, the nice news is by the time we're 65 years old, 77% of people own their homes. And of that 47 percentage points have no mortgage, and 30 percentage points still has a mortgage, right? So 30% has a mortgage, 47% has no mortgage. That adds up to 77. And the other 23% are renting. One of the secrets, if you can do it, I know it's not easy, particularly with interest rates where they are now and housing costs where they are. If there's any way to pay off that mortgage before you retire, you're really going to thank yourself in the future if you can make that happen. Okay, let's keep going. Transportation. And this includes things like vehicles, the cost of the vehicle, the maintenance, the gasoline, all of that. And the good news there, unlike healthcare, is the cost does go down. And I think part of the reason for that is many people that are 45 to 54, you know, we might have kids at home and maybe we're helping them out with their car payment. Kids that are 16, 17, 18, whatever, mom and dad probably need their own cars as well. So, you know, it's not unusual for a family of 4 to have 4 cars as you're approaching empty nest days, but you're not quite there yet. So what does the data show? On transportation, again, it peaks out at about 45 to 54, right? That's when you're at your peak earning years. You might be driving a nicer car. Your job might require that. Or, you know, you've driven an older car your whole life. You're making good money, 45 to 54. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to treat myself to a nice car. So the transportation cost goes from $15,600 a year for the household down to $8,100. And I think one of the things that drives that is sometimes people cut back to one car. Now, I do have thoughts on this, and that is, you know what's more expensive than splurging and having a second car so both you and your spouse can have your total freedom? Yes, it's an expense, but I would say it's an investment, because you know what's more expensive than having that second car? It's getting a divorce. And it's cheap therapy. It's cheap insurance to keep your relationship strong. So if he can afford it, most people, I think, are better served having two cars if there's two of them in a partnership or a marriage. Okay, so hopefully you found that helpful. And I know that you're going to find this video up here helpful, where I talk about the other end of the equation, where I talk about how much money do you need if you want to spend $5,000 a year in retirement, $10,000 a year in retirement, or $15,000 a year in retirement. So it talks about the other end of the equation, the savings needed to support your lifestyle. You'll find that video here. It's one of my more popular and more recent videos. I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you in there. Bye-bye.